What goes into making a good product or a good prototype? That's what we're going to talk about in this video. So I've been working on this slide presentation tool, and I want to give a dev update. Hey, what's up? This is Paul Solt from Super Easy Apps, and we're talking about a Mac tool that I've been developing to sort of assist with making video presentations or just making presentations in general, where I want to have an overlay on top of the screen. So what does that look like? Let's go ahead and run this, and I'll give you kind of an update on this tool. So this slideshow that I can run is something that can be a full screen slideshow that runs over the content of whatever I want to talk about. And so I've been doing some sort of developer productivity videos. I wanted to make a little tool that allowed me to walk through some keyboard shortcuts, demonstrate some different things, and walk through that process. And so I built this tool that can generate these slides from Markdown. So I write a lot in Markdown, and I want to turn that text that I typically would write as like a blog post or something into a working presentation. And so I had a couple requirements. I didn't necessarily want to take over the full screen. I wanted the screen to still be interactive. And so I'm using a panel to display the notification that's using AppKit for the sort of window management with NS Panel in a special mode that allows me to be on top of everything. And then I'm using Swift UI for all of the UI rendering, and I'm doing some text parsing and all kinds of fun things. So I recently enhanced this today because I wanted to do one more video, and I was like, I fixed the so I've been living with quirks in this tool. And so for the most part, like the initial version of the tool, I always had to rebuild it. I always had to paste in my input. So you can see here for some of the videos I did one on preparing for technical interviews. This was the whole slide deck. I had to put it in here in code because the editor functionality wasn't quite working yet. But I had the text parsing working. And then I had my productivity shortcuts video, and that had a bunch of stuff, and sort of supporting some of these different things meant I had to do certain features. Like this one right here required special parsing in order to show some of these symbols and not have them like error out. And I forget what else. Something else in here required me to make some changes. So as I've been sort of living with the product, I'm sort of filling the gaps that exist and improving the features. This was the first presentation I did, and you can go see that video on YouTube. I did one on 36 Xcode keyboard shortcuts, and then I cut it down to 30 and redid it with a focus on things that were really important and cut out some of the things that weren't. And so I wanted to, I'm doing a new series on these other sort of productivity shortcuts. And in doing that, I wanted to get the tool into a more usable spot so I don't have to always make code changes to make the video. And so this is the latest version. I've added keyboard shortcuts, so that's a big thing. So I can do Command R to just run the slideshow. And then this responds to the mouse wheel. I do this because I was using all the key presses and stuff and showing that on screen. So like when I save something, you can see the keyboard shortcut in the bottom left corner. I think I've configured that right now with Keycaster to only do command keys. So you're not seeing all keys, which I did have on before, but it was just a little overwhelming. And so I felt like just the command keys, because I'm mainly focused on productivity stuff, and I don't think you need to see everything that I'm typing in two different locations. So just to be a little bit less distracting, that's kind of been the focus. So that's why I use the mouse wheel to sort of scroll through these. And so this is kind of the presenter view, and then we have the slideshow. So I would typically move the presenter view next to my camera. I've got my camera over here, and I've got another 27-inch monitor in a portrait orientation. So I can see myself and I can see my slides. And off screen, I can just cycle through the slides if I'm talking to the camera to go to the next slide without having to press any keys. Over here, if I'm scrolling, it's going to scroll the content, but if my mouse is over this, it's going to scroll through the presentation. I thought about adding the arrow keys. I haven't done that yet. Right now, I don't think that would work unless maybe I'm over this is a panel that's on top of everything. And I think this works with full screen. So if I go full screen, let me just double check. Yeah, it will still display. And so that was like one of the big development hurdles of like, I needed to be able to display this on top of everything, including full screen presentations. And I'm doing a similar type thing with my upcoming update to Super Easy Timer, but I don't have that all combined yet. So it's sort of like baby steps. So this is the presentation that I want to do. But then I've added some new features. So if we go over to Presenter and I bring this back, I can run the slideshow with Command R. I can stop the slideshow right now with Command D. And then I can open the editor with Command E, which is this new view. And I'm thinking about like maybe merging this with this. But this is kind of the thought process of what's going on. So what I'm doing is I'm taking Markdown and I'm creating a slideshow from it in a particular format. And in this case, I am doing like these little grid-based layouts and stuff like that. But I have a lot of flexibility on how this actually works. So all these different check marks change how it generates the slides. And so I'm parsing all of this, and then based on different settings, you could add titles to have numbers. So like if I just wanted to do a high-level topic video, I could have these 4 sections that I would want to talk about based on this. And in a scenario like that, you're most likely going to not have all of this detail, but this just sort of allows you to have different presentations. So if I were to make this presentation without all these details, it would just look something like this. And this is just a streamlined version of talking points that I could have in my slideshow. And so that's essentially what this allows us to do is we can customize how it works. And if I save it, it regenerates all these slides. And so how I'm doing this for like this style where it's kind of like show off a feature, I have the ability to do item counts rather than headline counts. It's a little bit more important when we're getting into like the little details. And then I can turn on, so what I have to turn on is a item as headlines. So if I save this, it now will promote each of these to be its own little headline slide. And so we get the title of the presentation, we get the subtitle of the next section or the headline of the next section, and then we get a item as a headline, and it's focused on that one piece of content. And by having the item count, we can now say, okay, these are going to be the X number of shortcuts that we're going to run through. And so in this case, it's 16 keyboard shortcuts. And so it just makes it really easy to create a presentation and sort of guide the flow while not taking over the whole computer screen. Now, there's other enhancements that I'm interested in adding, like having code snippets or having images or having blackout slides or having maybe a blank slide or something. I'm not sure entirely where it's beneficial. And so like everything that I'm doing in this application is based on how I want to use it and sort of play around with it. The other thing that I'm doing is sometimes you want a section overview and then having like a section review. So for a section overview, if I save this, we'll get just an overview of the concept and we can sort of run through that. And so this allows you to not give away all the details. And so like you keep some of the details out. And so I'm currently doing that with this like colon syntax. And I call this like a I think I call it like what did I call it? A subtitle. And so it's just like where this element can have like a code block associated with it. And it gets formatted a little bit differently. So that's one thing I'm playing with. I kind of wanted to have the ability to like jump between sides and to show this on the iPad. I don't know if I'm going to do that, but I would use like multi-peer connectivity for something like that if I wanted to play around with those APIs just for fun. So that's the section overview. And for these presentations, I'm typically not doing that. So I'll just save it and turn that off. And instead, what I'm doing is a section review that allows me to highlight the detailed, and I'm considering this the detail of one of these items. And so if I have the detail, if I don't have that checked, what you're going to see is there's going to be a recap. If we save it, am I lying about this? It looks like this detailed checkbox is actually not working. That's supposed to be either turning this on or off, and it doesn't seem to impact it. So maybe that's not hooked up anymore with all the changes. Regardless, that's kind of the flow. So this allows me to introduce new keyboard shortcuts or productivity tips, and then review them, and then move on to another section. So that's kind of cool. And then if we scroll to the very bottom, you'll see that it just sort of ends here. But if you want to have like a closing agenda based on this Markdown, we just hit that checkbox, save it, and we've added a new slide that just reviews the main headings that we've talked about. So I'm super excited about this version. It's the most like feature complete and like MVP version of the app that doesn't require constant rebuilding. I can bring in another presentation, or I can just write one from scratch. So if I were to cut this out, we could start a new presentation and we could talk about interviewing for success. Getting preparation. And then we could talk about desk setup. We could talk about, I don't know, camera setup. And we could talk about day of prep. All right. So we could just create a whole brand new slide deck, and this would be sort of the formatting. And so what I do is I parse headlines. So this is going to be the title of the slide deck, and each of these is going to be sort of the title of a section. And so this allows you to just walk through some of those things. Now we do have section review, and so I would want to get rid of items as headlines in this. And we've got too many. Let's get rid of section review. Is that even doing anything? I don't think it is. And then if I wanted the agenda, yeah. We do something like this. So then what we can do is we can run this slideshow, and we could just overlay this on whatever we wanted to overlay it. So if we're going through content, this can help guide us through that. And if I wanted the headlines to have numbering, we could just turn that on. I don't even have to stop it. It just updates all of my slides. So we can go all the way to the beginning, and let's just hide everything, hide others. I would move this off screen, and I would start going through and I'd move this off screen. And then I would just start going through my slides. And in this particular format, I could just talk to the camera. I see all my slides. I see my notes if I have any notes. And I can click to advance, or I can just scroll wheel. Actually, that's something I have to add, this view. I cannot scroll in this view. Well, that's going to scroll through everything. I don't have an easy way of going through. So that is the app, and it lets me just talk through these points with whatever's on my screen above, and it's super cool, and it's super flexible so that I can just now I can just edit these new slides if I'm scrolling through. The other thing I added is it's going to update what the selected slide is. So before it didn't do that, now it does, and so as you scroll, you can do that. The other cool thing is you can actually click to jump. So if I needed to off screen switch which slide I was on, and I have to like find the one that I want to go back to, or we have to go back to this one because of a question, I can go back to whatever that slide was. So this is super flexible. We just paste in Markdown, save it, and then we adjust how we want to give a presentation. And it will count things automatically, so I don't have to count them. I don't have to create these slides manually. And it's just a quick overlay. Up next, I kind of do want to take over the full screen. I don't know how I would format that. Maybe there's some kind of like annotation here where I just somehow annotate that this is going to be a certain full screen, or maybe it's some parameter here. I'm not sure exactly how I want to do that type of, because it would be non-traditional Markdown, but some way of saying like what kind of slide this might be could be interesting. So yeah, that is the development update I wanted to give. And I'm going to use this to make so we want the section review. Apparently detail doesn't seem to matter a whole lot. And a closing agenda. And then I want items as headlines. And so that's going to give me these different keyboard shortcuts that I can talk through and show off how to do each one of these different shortcuts. And then I can cover how that's going to look. So like actually looking in Xcode, walking through these, like showing off the build and run feature. Like you've got this up here to build and run. Actually, that's going to end the presentation because I'm building the app that I'm running. So I probably don't want to showcase all of these with this particular app. But that's how I can sort of go through and test these different things, or to highlight different things. Like probably the one that's going to make the most sense to go through is like some of this type of stuff of like editing the scheme. So if I'm in Xcode, now I can sort of see an agenda of either what I've talked about or what I want to talk about. And so I can sort of back up or go forward. So to edit the scheme, and I can just work in Xcode without having to juggle a slideshow and Xcode. It's all sort of live together. So that's kind of the goal of this app, is I can show you how to edit the scheme. If I need to get rid of this, I can click it to make it go away. And then I can just rerun the slideshow from my other screen and talk about the next thing, how to clear the console. So we got all this text down here, just clearing the console with Command K. All right, so if this was helpful, hope you enjoyed it. The big things that I had to fix was really taking it from prototype stage to robust app, and that meant like creating some kind of view model type object, creating some settings, having a font construct. So in order to support some of these features, like I want to show these mini slides. Well, these are different fonts than my normal slideshow. My normal slideshow has large fonts. So that meant that I had to parameterize the fonts that I'm using so that I could have a mini version as well as a large version. And so I did that with this new fonts object. And this is where I ran into one of the pitfalls of fonts. And this is probably Apple trying to be helpful in like having dynamic size fonts, but I needed more control. And I still don't know the best approach. You cannot get the point size from a font. And that makes it challenging if you want to support two different formats. So I had to pass in the point size to actually create these fonts of particular sizes so that I could display the content in a specific fashion. And then I ended up just creating a large version and a small version where I could fine tune those and then pass them in as needed wherever they're going to be called. So that's kind of how I worked around that. So in the preview, I'm passing in large fonts, and I don't know if this one will work. But this is like a headline item. And I could pass in a small font here. So if we passed in small fonts and save it, we should see that that one gets small, but the other ones are going to be large. So that's just an easy way to sort of see the different styles and sort of test out that feature. And I'm passing fonts via the environment. So that worked out pretty well. The biggest rough edge was getting that into the full screen notification. I had to make it, I didn't see another way to do it, but for the slide deck view, I think in here, I had to pass it not as the environment because I couldn't figure out a way of how to pass environment when you've got a hosting controller. I don't know if there's a way to do that. So I think the way you do that is you pass it as a normal parameter rather than the environment. I just didn't see a way to hook that up. So that's kind of how I have the NS View hosting a Swift UI view. Okay, so that's kind of exciting. Just having all these parameters. My settings are interesting. So I'm pulling settings. Actually, this is just a default thing, but this is my actual settings. And this is a state parameter. And the default one is just using app storage. One thing I did come across is you can't, if you want to use app storage, I think you're forced to use observable object. And just to get something simple, MVP prototype, you have to use observable object. You can't change this to the other macro because then you've got like conflicting stuff here. So this is how I save everything to disk. Anytime you save and then it regenerates, that is all done with that. And then the biggest enhancement I made today was getting this detail view. And this is one of those areas where I feel like SwiftUI, I'm always kind of fighting. I want access a lot of times to the index, and I want access to the object itself, which means I have to use a certain API to work off the indices with a scroll view. And then I was using the scroll view reader so that as you're scrolling, so this is one of the things that I added, as I am presenting, if I scroll, it's going to change this slide, and it does that in this area. But it was weird because I also want to support clicking on it, but I don't want it to center. And without this, I had this little check here. Without this setting, what happens is as you click, it always centers the slide. And that's a little bit jarring for the user because I click on build and run, and now build and run is up here instead of being down here. So it's shifted to always being in the center. And that's fine if I'm going through the slide on another screen and I'm using shortcuts, keyboard shortcuts, or the mouse wheel to scroll. I like it to be centered. Then I can see what came before, what came after. But when I'm physically clicking, it's jarring because it's changing the state too much. And so I had to do some workarounds here where I basically control whether this was user initiated or not. Doing something like that, now when we click, it maintains where it is on the screen without automatically scrolling. And then if I am running a presentation, then it will try to stay in center unless there's no more slides, then it will go to the end. Or if there's no more slides at the beginning, it will go to the top. But as you're going through the content, it's going to default to go through and always center that slide, which is super helpful because you have the before and after context. So a lot of this is just like trying some stuff and iterating on it and moving stuff around, seeing what works. So this is to prevent auto centering of the selected slide. Okay, so that was the biggest improvement. And in order to do that, I had to sort of pull apart everything to support fonts. So previously I had a static fonts, but that doesn't work when you need to have two different sizes for the same type of content. So this allows me to now pass in the fonts via the environment. And now these different UIs can have different sizes. You might want to extend that to the actual like VStack alignment spacing, but it looked good enough that it didn't seem like it was a problem running the app. So I didn't really do anything with that. So that's a big improvement. And then adding the keyboard shortcuts was like a major quality of life thing, because now saving would generate everything for me. And before this, I was generate and I had to like write what I wanted to write and then hit save manually. Now I could just use the keyboard shortcut without having to use the mouse. Super helpful. Seeing all the slides, super helpful, especially when reviewing changes. Like sometimes I'll notice something as I'm doing the presentation, and this is just another way to improve that experience. So that was the big push. So this last update is all about jumping to a slide. The one thing am I still using that? I don't think I'm using this anymore. I'm using, this is a conundrum. I'm using an array of slides, which I wanted to use an enum. Maybe that's the bad idea, but I have certain pieces of information that when I'm parsing, I know each one's going to have a different requirement for the view. And so I wanted to use this to control the view. But in my previous version of the slide view, we can find where that went. Like I queue everything off the type, and then I display the appropriate view, and I pass in that fonts property as an environment variable. I'm debating if I need to change it to like some kind of structure that I pass in, but I don't really like that. And so that was where I was running into issues with a normal for each loop. But I ended up doing this one where it's based on the indices of the slides. And so that way I have the index. And like, this is one of those rough edges. I constantly feel like I'm having to battle in SwiftUI. Like you write it one way so that it works, or you have some new requirement where you want to have a list of things to be able to edit them or favorite them or select them. In this case, I want to select a certain slide and I need to jump to a slide. So you have to, in SwiftUI, you have to sort of figure out how to get things to behave like you want, because I don't want to search for the slide to find the index. I just want to know what index I want to jump to. So that became important on this. And that's always been, I feel like, one of the rough edges in SwiftUI is anytime you have to work with an array data source, what's the best way to iterate over that? And then it's like, well, I need to actually queue my background color based on the slide index. So I need to know what the slide index, which means I have to change my for each loop to have a slide index. Stuff like that. And then it's nice to working with this on change event is super nice for automatically scrolling to something based on a change in the parameter. So that's super cool. So that's my dev update. Hopefully this was useful. I'm really happy with how this app is turning out. I think it's super cool that I can just like totally create slides. Like if you try to do something like this in Keynote, you're going to spend time trying to count how many different things you have. And with this tool, I can now just scroll to the end and see how many items. That might be another like enhancement I add, is just show me the item count, because sometimes I just want to know that for the video title. Or if I'm going to be talking about something, like how many different things am I going to be discussing in this? So that's the type of video I'm playing around with making. This is the tool that I'm using to make that a little bit easier, instead of making a Keynote, flipping back and forth between that, or doing all this in post. And I like to shoot things live as much as possible. So this overlay tool for creating presentations from Markdown allows me to talk about things on screen as I'm using apps. So if you found this helpful or interesting, leave a comment down below. If there's something specific in here you want me to talk more about on the creation of this kind of app idea, just comment down below and hit the like button if you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in another video where I talk about some of these keyboard shortcuts. And then maybe we'll get into some more Vim keyboard shortcuts, which I want to share so that you can be more productive using Vim mode in Xcode. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.